Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. Today we're covering the first two episodes of Season 2 of Rings of Power. But first, I have some shadow facts for you. In the last episode, we discussed the moral implications of mundane versus magical fire, and we floated the idea that perhaps magical fire was inherently evil or maybe just questionable. But a couple days later, I was reading The Hobbit to my kids, and I was reminded of the scene where Gandalf throws magical burning pine cones at the orcs and wargs. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is an example of a good form of magical fire.
I think it's very interesting that they're burning pine cones and not just fireballs. I think maybe the source, having a fuel source, somehow makes it less evil, like fire with no fuel source seems evil still, but maybe not.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a comment that Gandalf makes on Carathras in the book, where I think it might be Legolas is talking to him and suggests that he light their wood on fire. Mm-hmm. And Gandalf tries to light it on fire and does eventually. It's another example of good magical fire. He makes a comment, even he needs something to work upon. He needs fuel for the fire. He can't just make fire out of nothing.
Yeah, I wonder almost, and this might be getting too into the system of a soft magic system, but like if you need, for example, pine cones or woods to turn it into fire, if like the evil mages are using the people they're catching on fire as the source of the fire, like the fuel, mm-hmm. which is what makes it evil, not that fire inherently, but you're using a person as fuel for a fire.
Yeah. So let's jump into Rings of Power.
Okay, so it starts off with a flashback that I did not know was a flashback.
Yeah, it starts off with Sauron's backstory.
So I thought I didn't expect a flashback, although that's pretty common for a new season.
It's kind of like a prologue.
Yeah, it is kind of like a prologue. Just with a few people talking instead of a narrator. But yeah, I was definitely watching this. I caught on quickly that the elf was Sauron. It took me about a beat to figure that out. I eventually realized that it was Adar killing Sauron, which was already established. And in this scene, I feel for the orcs again. They don't really want to work for Sauron, and his speech kind of says, like, too bad you don't have a choice. And they make a choice to kill him instead. Like, these feel like good guys to me.
Or at least sympathetic bad guys. I mean, they are still orcs.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we've had some discussions about the inherent goodness or evil of orcs, but I do feel like maybe there was some potential here for them to have worked into something better. Also,
I definitely agree with that.
The assassination of Sauron reminded me a lot of the assassination of Caesar, each person stabbing him with a knife. You know, I feel like the orcs kind of were very methodical. I was expecting them to start like ripping him apart and stuff, but they kept it to stabbing. And he regenerates with a bunch of worms. It was really gross.
Yeah, kind of. It was, I mean, how do you depict his body reforming? Descriptions of this in the text are all very vague, mm-hmm. along the lines of, and Sauron got a new body and took up power somewhere, and several centuries later he mm-hmm. declared himself somewhere else, and you know, it's centuries in a matter of a paragraph. Right. So when you're turning this into a visual adaptation, you got to pick something, and making it seem repulsive seems a good choice to me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. This is a good one. It seems very evil. I imagined he, like, the current form, like, would just dissolve into dust and a new one would fall from the sky again, is what I would have pictured. But the gruesomeness is better than what I pictured, I think. I do want to say, between this, or still on this point, did you imagine when you were reading about Sauron reforming that it would be like so quick, or do you think he would have been missing for longer? Like I always got the vibe like he couldn't reform just that quickly.
I always figured it would take him a while. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if the show puts a particular amount of time on how long it takes.
Yeah, it doesn't actually say. It looked like that night though, or something.
Mm-hmm. Which I also can't prove from the text doesn't happen.
True. Yeah, and so Sauron basically tries to go straight back, and he runs across some humans fleeing the orcs. So we know this is Sauron, why he'd be heading back to the orcs, but the people he meets on the way tell him not to go there. There's orcs, and he seems kind of fine with going to the orcs. I wanted to get your take. Like, what did this old man talking to him, like, probably think? Because it doesn't make any sense for somebody to go run into death like that.
I mean, if I were that old man, maybe I'd think that, the orcs have someone that he loves captive or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just heading straight there.
Mm-hmm. Gonna go save his wife or mother or sister or something like that.
So, as he goes off with this old man, I do feel like it does seem Sauron genuinely wants to be good sometimes.
Yeah, there is a line in the Silmarillion that says that some say that Sauron actually did truly repent for a while in the Second Age before he fell back into his old ways.
Yeah, I always like a villain who is ambiguous or at least has regrets. Like it's Sauron before, and a lot of the Lord of the Rings villains seem like cartoonishly evil and very like proud. So some doubt is really nice.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that we get some explanation about Adar and Sauron becoming Halbrand and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But at this point, it still seems pretty mediocre to me. Sauron is killed so easily, and this seems unlikely to me.
Yeah.
Sauron, in his pride, would crown himself. He wouldn't let anyone crown him like this, and so this wouldn't expose him to that sort of vulnerability.
Yeah, I didn't mean to comment, but what kind of dark overlord has elections? He was trying to get elected by the orcs to be Dark King, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it would add legitimacy to his throne.
And that's the other side of this I was going to do for the generous take is maybe Sauron was so prideful that he didn't see any alternative except they go along with his plan.
I do like that.
Like he didn't anticipate that Adar or the orcs would turn on him because he couldn't see the faults in his logic that the orcs did, Although, like, again, like he every time he talks, and I really like this about him in this depiction, he's very convincing. Like
he is.
If I were an orc or Adar, I would have thought twice about my Ides of March move after that.
Yeah.
And so eventually, he runs off with these boat people who are fleeing, trying to, I assume, go to the islands. It isn't clear exactly where they're going.
Yeah, they're just on a raft.
Well, they start on a boat.
Well, yeah, they start on a boat, and then
it turns to a raft.
It becomes a raft. Who knows what they're doing?
Yeah.
Like I said, a little mediocre.
Do you think they could have been going to the island where Isildur is from and that Galadriel and Halbrand were, or do you think they were supposed to be looking for them?
I mean, I guess that's an okay explanation, except it's a really long voyage, and do they know where it is?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. They seem to be just on a boat.
And Halbrand never says, "Oh, I was on my way to Numenor, and here I ended up."
Yeah, that would have been a pretty good line from him. Yeah, I don't know. I think Isildur probably knew that this boat expedition was doomed, but the people on it didn't.
Halbrand Sauron, you mean?
Yeah, Halbrand Sauron. Yeah, they I feel like Halbrand knew, he knew what islands were out there. There's Numenor and then the elf one.
Tol Eressëa, but they weren't getting to Tol Eressëa.
Yeah, and I think Halbrand knew that, but the other people seemed to be just hoping for the best, which isn't a great plan. And then a fish monster attacks the boat, but spares Sauron, I guess, because he's... my theory is because he could smell the evil on him.
That's one explanation. Based on something we see later in Season 2, I wonder if the fish monster recognizes that Halbrand Sauron still has some part to play yet in the story, and spares him for the sake of his chance at redemption and the subsequent story when he turns that down. It wasn't very clear. Was this fish monster like just a monster out at sea, or was there something more to it? Like, is it sent by somebody, or is it just like one of the perils of going out on a boat? I think at this point, the only thing the show has established is that it's a wild sea monster.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought the scene where it spared him, though, kind of raised a lot of questions.
We'll see him again. So we have a lot to say about Galadriel, Elrond, the Elvish storyline, the Elven Rings of Power, all of that stuff.
It was the meat and potatoes of the episodes, for sure. It was a majority of it.
Yeah.
So to start, it has basically Elrond is with, is it the King Gil-galad?
Yes, Gil-galad is the king.
And he's like telling on Galadriel about bringing Halbrand Sauron to the rings, to the forge. And all the other elves were saying that she was withholding Halbrand's identity, but I didn't think, as soon as she found out it was Sauron, I thought she told everybody.
She rushed in and she said that Halbrand isn't who we think he is. Don't treat with him. And she did try to, like, not tell them the part where she was like, yeah, I brought Sauron here and I set him up for all this. But it was a relatively short period of time, was my impression of that. She wasn't withholding the idea that he was bad news from them.
Just his exact identity. Also, was she like, when she thought he was the king of the Southlands, the legitimate king of the Southlands, she told them all that too, right away too, right? From what I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was forthright with the story that she invented for Halbrand about the king of the Southlands and everything.
Yeah.
And then when she learned he was Sauron, she said, hey, he's bad news, stop talking to him. We need to not work with him anymore. But she never actually provided the information that he was Sauron.
Yeah, she says during her defense that he was appearing in fair form to hide his true self, which I thought was kind of funny. She was just going to admit that she thought Halbrand had a fair form.
Well,
so
the phrase fair form is applied to Sauron when he appears in a not overtly evil form.
Yeah.
It's a phrase from the book.
Wait, so hold on. In the book, he does have, like, he does hide and show up places?
In the book, Sauron has an identity of Anatar, and this is described as Sauron being in a fair form.
Yeah, I'm going to take the double meaning with it still. So I think I'm gonna put myself on the record, though, as saying that as the council goes on, Elrond comes to the decision not to use the rings, and he's probably right. Because, Sauron's like a master manipulator, and he's very good at plotting ahead. But I do think that he thinks that Sauron created the rings to help control the elves, but I also do think that Sauron also doesn't just want the elves to wither away or run. That's why he needs them there. He wants an adversary and not just control.
He can't rule people who have run and escaped him.
Exactly. So, I don't think that's the only ends, but I do think that the elves staying and fighting, like Sauron would just take control of everybody in Middle-earth, and he wouldn't have anything to do anymore, and he probably knows that he wouldn't really care to do much after that. Like, deep down inside, I imagine. I
think Sauron wants to heal Middle-earth, and he wants to have the elves there to have a healed Middle-earth. But he's going to heal it by ruling it and controlling it.
I don't remember if this is Elrond or Gil-galad, but one of them says that because of you, our enemy lives to Galadriel. I do feel like that's a bit unfair. He was alive when she found her.
Yeah.
And he saved her more than anything.
Yeah. But she also did bring him to Numenor and then brought him to the Southlands and gave him a narrative about being king and installed him as king. And she also helped him a lot.
She empowered him, but he would not be dead without her. And she would be dead without him.
He might be dead on the ocean without her.
Yeah, I think he would be probably trapped in Numenor without her. We could definitely say.
It all depends on whether Elendil actually runs across and saves Halbrand with or without Galadriel.
Yeah.
But Galadriel being there may have had some butterfly effects to being saved by Elendil. So I think there's a chance Halbrand is never rescued from the sea.
Yeah, maybe. I do think that it's interesting that since the beginning of these rings that people have been trying to destroy them. Like since their creation.
Yes. I like that as a plot point, but it's an adaptational choice that the show is taking. There's none of this is filled in the lore. So precisely what the three rings are doing and people's reactions to them is all Rings of Power choices, but I do happen to really like this choice.
Yeah.
To have people trying to destroy these rings of power all the time. Love it.
Yeah, and I think I could have seen them adapting it either way, where everybody didn't realize how dangerous it was. But it does, like, and I think it was well done. Like, it does make this feel like it has poetic connections to the Lord of the Rings, to the Fellowship of the Ring through the Return of the King.
Yeah.
That era definitely like makes it. I've seen adaptations do this poorly too, where they try to make something thematically similar, but it feels like it's just copying what they're adapting is, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of adaptations do it poorly, but I feel like this was done well. And I feel like Elrond's reason for wanting to destroy the rings didn't feel like the writers just said, well, we want them to destroy the ring, somebody trying to destroy the rings like in the other movie, so let's find a reason. It feels like it arose naturally from the plot and his motivations.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think that I've been kind of poking at reading Elrond, Sauron, and Galadriel being in a very low-key love triangle. It does make Elrond's distrust of the rings and Galadriel hit slightly different. I'm not dying on this hill or saying it's the best reading, but it's definitely something I picked up on the scene where she was trying to convince him to give over the rings to Gil-galad.
I think you're not the only one who reads it this way, but it's not something that I've ever picked up on when I'm watching it.
It's not even in every scene is with them, but there has just been a select few scenes. Galadriel and Halbrand / Sauron, I've known it seems like it's a lot stronger, more strongly implied, even though it's still not explicitly stated, I don't ever think, at this point. And then the Galadriel Elrond thing was very subtle, so like I said, in the story works well without it too, so I'm not dying on this hill, but I do think it popped back up in the scene between Galadriel and Elrond.
Interesting. Thank you for mentioning that. Also,
the elf that he was consulting with and hiding out with, I keep calling him the wise elf because I didn't write down his name.
Círdan.
Him leaving with them, I think, is a bad omen. Like, so in Lord of the Rings, after Sauron makes some rings, that ring has an explicit corrupting power to it. I think right now the rings and the potential to use them or not leads them to corrupt through like old-fashioned, like, I have the power in the situation, I'm holding the rings. Whoever holds the rings has the most direct say in them, but it is showing them kind of having that corrupting influence too.
Yeah. And canonically, the elven rings are not known as corruptive sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think the magic is corrupting any of the elves, I think, or even really alluring them. Although they do say a few times that, in fact, my next note, he says that he mentioned the rings change the hearts of people, or he says that Celebrimbor wanted to create crafts that were so beautiful, change the hearts of people, and
turn the hearts. Yeah.
I do think changing the hearts of someone is even scarier than, like, mind control.
But even art in the primary world can turn our hearts.
Yeah, that is true. I feel like, and I'm guessing the quote originally meant that, just changing the hearts of somebody through its expression and beauty is one thing, but, like, mystically changing somebody's desires and motivations is, I think, scarier than controlling their actions, even.
It comes down to the free will that we have to not have our hearts be turned.
Yeah, that's hard to because if something subtly something subtly influences you and changes the way you feel about something, it's hard to say you have any real control over that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing if it's like in the domain of like your thinking head, your brain, and you know that there's something trying to convince you of something. Like overt propaganda usually will trigger your skeptical mind, whereas like more subtle like art forms that don't seem like they're trying to say a message but make you feel something probably are more powerful. And if you take this to like the magical extremes of these two sides of the coin, I feel like changing somebody's motivation, especially through like semi-magical means, which I don't know if that's what's happening with these rings or not. It's kind of like also what I was talking about earlier with the mithril, that there's like an allure to them that seems like magical. Maybe it's just the actual inherent powers and how somebody desires that power, though. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I think in this case of the elven rings, more are corrupting already existing corruption, if that makes sense. And the urge and pull to use them is strictly like personal. It's not like the urge that Frodo felt to put on the ring.
Yeah, it does seem to be somewhat different than the One Ring. I really like the ambiguity that this show is creating around the Elven Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've only just scratched the surface talking about the moral implications of this, and changing hearts, turning hearts is only the tip of the iceberg, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the complexity that is being created here. The books tend to leave us with the understanding that the Elven Rings are just good rings. Maybe like there are some clues in the text where we can begin to wonder if they might have been a flawed idea in some way. We're told that the Elven Rings preserve things.
Yeah.
The world is meant to move forward. The world is not meant to be held back like the elves are trying to hold it back. And so you might be able to get some idea of some questionability about the Elven Rings, but fundamentally they are presented as good rings in the text. And the ambiguity that we have here about wondering if they are good or not seems very plausible given the circumstances around their creation.
I think that, and I don't know how much the text does that, but I think it is a good point to talk about like how stopping the fading of the elves is kind of messing with higher powers they don't understand, like cycles and time itself, you know?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't seem like a very wise move. On the other hand, though, the elves are kind of desperately needing Middle Earth, who's the only one who can stand up to Sauron, which also is kind of their responsibility in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very good ethical dilemma, moral dilemma. I think that also. I wanted to question. Was Halbrand / Sauron there for the creation of the Elven Rings, but had no actual influence on them, like the show, or do we not know in the text?
So what we know about the creation of the rings from the text is that Sauron, Anatar, he created the 16 rings that ended up being for dwarves and men with Celebrimbor.
Okay.
And then Sauron was working on his own, and Celebrimbor was also working on his own, and Celebrimbor made the 3 Elven Rings, and Sauron made his one ring.
Oh, so it sounds like they were almost all made at the same time, but some of them were in secret from the other.
Yeah. And
Maybe.
The 1 and the 3 were made after the 16.
Okay.
So the show has reversed the order of the creation here, but they have preserved the idea that Sauron was not involved in the forging of the 3. The show presents it, and in the text as well, that Celebrimbor got ideas about how to forge rings from who he later learned to be Sauron.
Okay.
But Sauron was actually not involved in the forging of the 3.
That's pretty good. I like that they adapted it, that the Elven Rings, which are, as far as we can tell, the most unambiguously good, were made, and then the semi-corrupted rings were made or the corrupted rings were made next, and then the one true evil ring was made last. It kind of is like a progression of timeline of corruption, you know?
Yeah.
Like the good ones, the ones that have been corrupted, and the ones that are completely gone, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's interesting that Tolkien didn't have it written like that, as far as it seems.
No, he did not. So I have a good example of why I am hesitant to judge Rings of Power as a show prematurely.
Sure.
There's a scene where Círdan is going to drop the rings in the water. He's going to sink the rings. And then something makes a plop in the water, and that stops him from dropping the rings into the river. And at this point, we have no way to determine who made that plop. Was it Ilúvatar himself? Was it Ulmo, the god of waters? Was it some Maya that works for Ulmo, who works in riverbeds? Was it some contrivance of Sauron yet to be explained? It's difficult to really analyze a scene like this until we have the entire work accessible to us and we understand the consequences of Círdan not destroying the Elven Rings.
Yeah, there was this vaguely reminds me. So I agree definitely that there's a lot of stuff in the show that just needs to be answered. And you have some more answers than I do. But there was something I wanted to talk about in the other thing with Ilúvatar's influence and stuff. So it seemed, and it's kind of influenced my perception of Lord of the Rings. And anytime somebody tries to like judge somebody's actions, like this episode and the last episode where we talked about Galadriel being judged by others for helping Sauron, I think it's a bit harsh in a world where things seem to have a fate and work out, that like her actions can be judged harshly, even if she did help Halbrand become Sauron. Like, Sauron was tricking her, and that's on Sauron. That's a black mark on Sauron, and Galadriel was doing the right thing, as far as she saw. And eventually it does fix itself out, although it does take a long time in this case for Sauron to finally get taken back down. But ultimately things seem to have, like, the tend towards resolution, and that might just be because I know more of the plot points and stuff like that. And if I were in the moment, obviously it'd be hard to say that about Galadriel, but and maybe this is an attitude I could take into life, but maybe like people making mistakes really are just in the end supposed to happen that way, and everything is kind of happening how it's supposed to. It's kind of hard when you apply that to your own actions, because it's like, then it doesn't matter what I do. You have to follow a moral compass for yourself, but as long as people are acting like honorably and with best intentions, it's hard to judge other people, and even doubly so in Middle-earth, I feel like.
Yeah, and I was going to draw a distinction that not all mistakes have to be of the same variety. Mm. Like, you can have some mistakes that you could say were fated or are part of the greater scheme of things.
Sure.
And then there's other mistakes that maybe you should have done better.
Yeah. So I'm interested, where do you stand with Galadriel falling for Halbrand in his story?
I think there's a lot to be said for Galadriel. Mm-hmm. And, doing the right thing to, encourage him to be a good person, and telling him that, you can always change your actions and be a better person. And if she followed through with that, even when he was Sauron, that would have helped.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I did not consider it that way at all.
I mean, the other thing she could have done better, I think, is not enforced a narrative on him about being king of the Southlands. That was pretty weak evidence she had for it, mm-hmm. and he clearly didn't want to do this.
Yeah.
She kind of pushed him into this.
Okay, but I do feel like, and I feel like a lot of the characters, even though they don't explicitly know all that, they do feel, I feel like a lot of people are blaming Galadriel for the Sauron thing in universe and outside of universe, I'm assuming too. But this is Sauron. He's like the master at like corrupting. I think he wanted justification, and he wanted Galadriel. He like ultimately wanted Galadriel to push him so he could point and say, "You did this, not me." So he didn't have to be accountable for what he did. But I feel like that was ultimately, maybe not consciously, maybe it was conscious, part of his machinations and design, like he put off an aura of a runaway royal exile that Galadriel picked up on really well. And if, it wasn't Sauron who was, he's a Maiar, is it?
Maiar. He's a Maiar. He's a
Maiar. So if it wasn't Sauron who's a Maiar, she probably wouldn't get this vibe of extraordinary power from him, or and I think Sauron would have known that too. And I think the whole first season was him manufacturing an alibi or a scapegoat for his rise to power. And maybe, sure, if Galadriel wasn't around pushing, he would have had to figure something else out or do something else. But I think ultimately he would have been towards trying to retake Middle-earth again, and the Southlands, and what becomes Mordor.
I think that's absolutely what he's going to use season 1 as, what he is using season 1 as. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that was his idea when he was doing it.
It's hard for me to say. I want to watch more and consider it. I just don't trust him to go ahead and now say, like, I was content to sit on a raft forever or be a blacksmith in Numenor for the rest of eternity, And
he also might not have been content to do that, but I think the Halbrand who was thinking about it was genuinely entertaining that idea.
Yeah, I want to see more about this and see more about his internal state through the flashbacks. I still feel like Galadriel was deceived. And Halbrand can't come clear and say, I'm Sauron, but he could have said, this is emphatically not mine, although she still wouldn't have believed him.
He said he picked it up off a dead man.
Yeah, but okay, if your father was a dead man wearing that and you picked it up off him, that doesn't mean you're not the heir. He should have lied about his origin more emphatically, stuff like that. If he really, he could have shut it down more completely if he really wanted to say, I was trying to change.
And Galadriel could have asked, was that dead man your father?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I just feel like, and I'm gonna keep this as a solid through thread on this point if it comes up later this season between Galadriel and Sauron, that I feel like Galadriel's still the victim here, and Sauron, the ultimate evil, is the evil here.
Yeah, and I mean, it is that, and it's also that Galadriel might have done better at a couple turns, too. It can be both.
She could have been wiser and more prudent, I'll admit that, but I do think, given with the information she was given, she made the best choices that she could.
In many instances, I agree with that, yes.
This does, speaking of questionable choices, I wonder how much of a Pandora's box putting those rings on where Galadriel was one of them. I forget the order, but how much if the next day they decided Elrond was right, they need to leave, could they just take the rings off, leave, and never come back to Middle-earth? Or is it kind of impossible now?
I mean, how much power do these rings exert over their holders? It's a great question. I don't think the show has an answer for it yet.
Yeah.
Can they take the rings off? Mm-hmm. Who knows?
There is a scene that the Gil-galad and Galadriel bonding over the rings effects on getting premonitions. I really liked that scene a lot. It was the first time I saw Gil-galad and didn't get the willies. He kind of creeps me out, and I don't like him. But this scene, I felt for him a little bit. Yeah. So they're talking about going to stop Sauron now, and Galadriel offers to go, and the king says that once you've trusted him once, he can manipulate you more. He can create better illusions and stuff. It reminded me very much of that idea of you need to consent to be corrupted. You need to let it in one way or the other.
Yeah, I like that as a train of thought for this line. Mm-hmm. I also like that the show has given the Elven Rings the power to show possible futures. Mm-hmm. This is also an adaptation choice because we don't know precisely what the Elven Rings do. But this seems like a choice with some powerful storytelling potential. It only slightly hardens the magic. It still leaves it very open-ended and vague and pretty soft. And so I really like this.
Yeah, it also fits well with Galadriel's mirror and whichever one that would have been in, either first or second movie.
First.
The first movie. Showing the future kind of fits the theme, Yeah. And this would be her first foray into premonition magic.
Mm-hmm. At one point, the word labyrinth is used to describe the kind of situation that the elves find themselves in now. I think this is a very interesting choice of vocabulary. Labyrinth is a word of unknown pre-Greek origin, and I find this word extremely out of place in Tolkien's work, which is so careful to use words of Germanic origin.
Sure, yeah.
And so I enjoy the usage of this word as conveying how out of place the concept is to the elves' way of life. They find themselves in a moral predicament as alien to their culture as the word labyrinth is to the vocabulary of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I that's very well put. I did not pick up on it at all, but yeah.
I don't know that any of that was intended to be picked up on. It was just something that occurred to me.
It works well. Maybe it was on purpose even, the more I think about it, but if not, it still works.
So I really like Elrond's stance on the issue of the rings overall. From Elrond's point of view, objects which take any inspiration from Sauron should be suspect. I appreciate that Elrond has some caution about this.
Yeah, I was going back and forth when I was watching these two episodes. Earlier I mentioned he was really smart. Just a minute ago I went on the tirade about like how things are fated to kind of work out in the end. So I do feel like Elrond just playing into what Sauron wants and just leaving, I think is really smart. He wants to, refuse to play any part in Sauron's plot by not doing what the most obvious thing is.
He wants to just walk away from Sauron.
Yeah, I do think it's still a poor choice, though, because even if it's part of his design, it's like when you're playing chess and you put a move in jeopardy, like if you let them take that piece, sometimes it's the best move, but it's not always, and you can't just assume that letting them take that piece is the best move. You have to think about all of the consequences, if it would be good or not. If you can trade, for example, it would be for the chess, but like in real life, like Sauron might already be considering both options and think it more likely that they tried to resist him by putting the rings on, but his easier move would be if they didn't, just because he doesn't think that's likely and has more plans for path A, they resist him, doesn't mean that path B is easier for him if they leave,
When Sauron has a plot, I think he tends to use plots where either option will suit him.
Right, exactly. Like a catch-22 is definitely the position Sauron would want to be, and I could see him doing that in this instance.
To carry your chess analogy forward, it would be when you fork two pieces.
Yes.
I'm going to take your queen or I'm going to take your rook, but you can't save both.
Exactly. That's exactly what Sauron is, and you have to determine which one is worth sacrificing and which one he's planning on you sacrificing, going a third step in this, maybe the queen typically would be the best one to take, but your rook's in a really good position for something else. So he wants you to save your queen so he could take the rook. But you don't know. You have to know what that opportunity is to advance on it too. It's a lot of converging things, but I don't think it's as simple as saying this is what he wants to do, so we don't do it.
Yeah. Sauron wants a lot of things.
Right. So, but on the other hand, I can see like the wisdom in it, especially in Middle Earth, where things ultimately tend towards being just and good at the end through the actions of people who rise to the occasion. But why not just step aside and let the chips fall as they may, let things play out, because eventually something will happen where it, arcs back to justice. I feel like with like Iluvatar can find someone else to fight Sauron from under his control, and we need to go because it's the cycle, the leaves falling. We're not meant to stay here forever, So I see some of the wisdom in trusting that things are going to be okay, but I don't know if that in this circumstance is or isn't the right choice. We won't get to see because they put the rings on, We'll never know what happens if Elrond got his way. Trusting
in fate and taking hope from that doesn't absolve anyone of not doing the right thing.
That's true, but also, the rings, like you said earlier, kind of are a perversion of natural cycles and orders. You can't just break the rules of the universe because you want to, or even if you have a good reason to. And sometimes I get the feeling, especially from the king, like he just doesn't want to lose his power and time in the Middle Earth, but most of the other elves just genuinely want to do the right thing and stand up to Sauron. It's kind of their, again, like Sauron's connected to them. He's the only reason the elves are the only reason he's in Middle Earth, I think.
Yeah.
So they kind of feel like it's their mess, they have to clean it up, but there's a cost to everything, and like you said, there's a subtle questionability to these elven rings of power that even outside of Sauron making them just seems like playing with fire, so to speak.
Yeah, but sometimes fire is the right thing to use. Sometimes you do have to fight fire with fire, and if these rings are not actually evil, they might still be usable for their purposes.
Yeah, and I can't decide if Elrond is being wise or fallen to despair.
I don't think he's falling to despair. I think he's wise to be cautious and probably a little bit overmuch, but I think I also tend to fall on the Elrond side of the spectrum.
There's a scene, this next scene where he's talking to the wise elf again. He's kind of he seems very defeatist though about the rings being put on. The elf reassures him. This is the one where he's showing the attraction of the rings with the fish.
Yeah.
But I don't think Elrond's mindset really should be, this is a trap. These rings should be destroyed. Or he should be saying, this is a trap. These rings should be destroyed. It's not up to me. So what can I do going forward? I think is a very good attitude to take, for Elrond. Since it's not up to him if the rings should be destroyed or not, he needs to think about what he could do best next. And he was kind of in this scene falling to despair, and he's just, the other elf reassures him that the rings are fine, which I don't think is true either, but
yeah. Well, there's a lot going on. It's I don't think Elrond's actions are those of someone in despair.
I think this episode shows that he doesn't resolve to doing that, but it does seem like he's like tempted to or flirting with the idea of it for me in some of these scenes in these episodes.
Yeah, we all have our moments of doubt. Mm-hmm. So all of this dialogue throughout this entire plot line here surrounding the Elven Rings seems very applicable to the Unholy Trinity for me. Things like, you're right to be cautious and don't let that blind you to the good that can be done with these is the type of argument that I tend to get when I try to talk to people about the issues that I have with algorithms, social media, and AI.
I feel like at this scene too, they're not even dealing with the whole unholy trinity. This would have been like early on when algorithms were first being used for targeted ads or something too. Something small, like the first step, the first piece of the puzzle where you can't see how it comes out to be a mutually reinforcing problem.
Yeah, but it's this plotline, it's dialogue regarding the moral questionability of the Elven Rings that I see as applicable to this particular interpretation.
Yeah, I guess Sauron would be like Google then, and Elrond would be like somebody who wants to use ad block or on YouTube or something. And everyone else is like, you can't do that. It'll ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, maybe.
So that was all we had to say about the elves, just that little bit.
Yeah, just that. Next, we have the elf called Adar.
I still feel bad. I feel like it's hard to call him an elf anymore.
It was a transition.
Yeah. Yeah, he may be still an elf. It's hard to tell. We don't know how it all works.
He can go out in the sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah, and he likes it.
Yeah.
I will say first thing that Waldreg had such a glow up in that armor. Like, he looks so much cooler now than in a potato sack, which I guess I could have assumed, but like, it blows my mind. Sometimes, I don't know, like there's a character you see who looks like ugly no matter what they're wearing, but Waldreg almost looks like stately.
And I suppose that's part of why he lined up with Adar.
Maybe, yeah. I do think that I'm probably going to keep switching back. I'm going to attempt to keep calling him Sauron going forward rather than Halbrand. But he is very clever. He's trying to convince Adar to ally against Sauron, while being Sauron.
He's using Adar's fear of Sauron against him.
Yeah. Like, disguises are hard to pull off, obviously, in this sort of situation. But then going into disguise and saying, I will help you fight me is really crazy.
It's so cunning. Mm-hmm. And the best lies are mostly true. Sauron is going on with his lies, but the reason they work is that it's 95% true. He just leaves out the fact that, by the way, I'm Sauron.
Yeah. Also, maybe an example of his cunning. I felt like it was kind of weird that he just adopts a warg, like a dog. I don't know.
I think that's Adar's warg.
Oh, is it Adar's?
Sauron releases the warg.
He befriends him in jail. He feeds him his rations and stuff.
Yeah, and then he uses the warg to kill Waldreg.
That was another interesting thing. I think they commented about how he doesn't sleep or eat, Mm-hmm. And it's because he doesn't need to. Like, all the puzzle pieces they needed were there. They just didn't figure it out.
Yeah.
He does seem legitimately traumatized by the whole Orc A2 Brutus. Like, do the writers really need to justify Sauron's evil anymore? Like I feel like his motivation for taking out Adar as like a rival power person fits really well too. I don't know if they needed him going back and remembering getting stabbed during any of this. But maybe it's good for some people. I don't know.
Didn't bother me.
I'm not saying it bugged me. I just felt unnecessary.
I feel like Sauron would be the kind of person who wouldn't let a deed like that go unpunished.
I do think by the end of this that Adar is expecting Halbrand to be Sauron. And that's why he made him swear his fealty to him so emphatically and in a humiliating way.
I don't think Adar has any clue about this.
No, I don't know. There's just some things at the end too that he says that make me think he's subtly onto him. But then again, also if Adar had even the slightest suspicion, he probably would just have him executed. So
yeah, just run him through. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
Well, next there's the Harfoots.
Right. So the Stranger's Dream still has me guessing who he might be, where he grabs the staff and has terrible visions.
Yep.
Still could see him either being Gandalf or Saruman at that point. I do think they have him talking a lot more, and he has a completely different accent than Nori, and it really bugs me considering how important Nori teaching this guy to talk was in the last season. Not only his accent, his vocabulary, his effect, stuff like that.
I never thought about this before, but you're completely correct.
The most generous take I have is since he is Maya.
Yeah, he's Maya.
He can, once he unlocks language, he has a more mystical way of speaking just inherently as part of his being, which has a lot of implications too.
Yeah. And hasn't explicitly been established by the show.
Yeah, it really struck me as odd that he didn't have an Irish accent at all. Although both the characters that he's look like he's becoming also don't really have an accent like that either. So I think that's why they had to do it.
Yeah, I loved the walking song from season 1, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I watched this episode, I did not enjoy seeing it get drawn into the story as a plot point so much.
Yeah, I remember you saying how much you liked it, and I was wondering if this was great to you or terrible. I knew it had to be kind of go one way or the other, though.
It felt terrible to me when I was first watching it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel that the song needed any extra explanation. It was just great existing as it was.
Yeah.
But I will say I have warmed up to this choice a little more over time in rewatching. It's much less offensive to me now than it was. I still don't know that I'm a big fan of it, but it gets better.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen so far, what it feels like to me is a lot of people probably liked it from season 1, and they just wanted to have a reason to bring it up again. Like, look what we did. I don't know if that's actually what happened or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, during this walking song and how the song was discussing how to get their way through, they were talking about the 4 hobbits. They didn't actually use that term, but their ancestors, how they used to know this place. It struck me that these proto-hobbits lived quite differently than hobbits in Lord of the Rings, which I guess that's quite a long time for me to realize this. But the main thing about hobbits is how much they crave to stay in place and not be out and about, and these people are constantly out and about. It's a little bit of irony I didn't pick up on for some reason.
Yeah, definitely. These are definitely proto-hobbits who are living in a very different type of society than what they eventually found in the Shire.
I think, and then as I said this too, it's I guess cave people also lived as differently to us in the same way, though.
Even more so.
Are these mages that show up in the desert related to the ones they fought in the forest?
In some way.
They in some way?
They're all connected, yeah.
Okay. And so they introduced another wizard guy. He looks like he's supposed to be Saruman to me. Just his presence and appearance.
Yeah, the desert mages and the cultists, they all work for this dark wizard.
Yeah. But that's the thing. He seems pretty evil already. That would be hard to reconcile with Saruman, in the Hobbit trilogy or what we know from the lore. He's not evil until the beginning of the Fellowship, right?
I agree with your understanding here. And say what you will about adaptation choices that Rings of Power has made or faults it might have with the core of the original and stuff like that. One of the things Rings of Power has not done is directly defy something that is established in The Lord of the Rings directly.
Okay.
And I feel like having an evil Saruman here in the form of the Dark Wizard would undermine Saruman's later reveal as being an evil power, which is a different type of adaptation choice than they've ever done before. So I think Rings of Power needs the benefit of the doubt in this case, that the evil wizard is not Saruman.
I will say that, just doing a generous take, if this is Saruman, I'm considering all the angles here. He hasn't been shown to be explicitly evil if these desert mages are different than the forest mages, because, and even if the forest mages are connected to him, like he might be a little edgy and weird, but he hasn't. We don't know, just because he is opposed to the protagonist, if he is, what his motivations are, why he's doing this, if there's a misunderstanding. He could be, in his eyes, like, not being evil. He could not be being evil for all we know.
And that's fair.
He just seems evil, though. He really does.
Yeah. Well, we can keep watching, and you can make more determinations by the end of the season.
The Hobbit's guessing at the stranger's name is pretty on the nose with this whole discussion, though, that we're having, and probably, I'm assuming, the whole fan base was having at this point.
Yeah.
He also says, no one can give you a name, is kind of odd to me. Most people are given their name.
I agree. People giving each other names is kind of how naming works in the Lord of the Rings books. So saying that one isn't just given names doesn't really fit with that. What role this is going to play in the story can't really be determined without a complete story, though. I want to see how naming is handled throughout the entire show. Maybe the stranger is wrong about his understanding of naming. Like, maybe this is a statement made in error.
Yeah, he that's true. I mean, how this guy still is getting a grasp on how things work. That's the best read on this, is like Nori and Poppy were like thinking, but didn't feel like going into a lessons like, no, Mr. Stranger, that is how names work. Like, he's just confused there. He does that regardless of all that. That is one of the most Gandalf riddle speak thing I've ever heard. He sounded just like Gandalf to me. So this is a big... I want him to be Saruman. I think that'd be more interesting, but I do think he's going to end up being Gandalf.
I need to just stay quiet.
Yeah.
No comment.
Also, so the last thing is they have an automatic alarm on a well in the middle of a desert, and I just thought that was an ingenious trap. Very smart.
It is a great trap. And
because it also doubles, the well could be a well for people who know about the trap and just know to turn off the alarm before it goes off, too. Like, great. I just like that.
It is a very clever trap. What I noticed was that the Nori and Poppy say that they can't cry from dehydration. And that's some pretty serious dehydration. Yeah. This happens to Sam in Mordor, too.
Yeah, I got the vibe that, like, also Mordor just had so much ambient heat that, like, tears just couldn't come out, too. But
it was dehydration.
It was dehydration. Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember them mentioning that he couldn't cry because he's dehydrated, I think. I definitely remember that. It's in the movies?
It's definitely in the book. I don't remember it being in the movie.
There might be a throwaway line. If not, then it makes so much sense that I added the memory in automatically. So there's some points about Khazad-dûm as well. There's an early scene where there is an earthquake. I think it's odd that she's the only one who notices it.
It's true. It seems like a really big earthquake and no one else is reacting. So I have a generous take for this. What we see is what Disa is feeling. And we know Disa, as a mountain singer, is very connected to the mountain in a way that others aren't. So maybe what we're seeing is less accurate to what's happening and more accurate to what Disa is feeling. Okay,
that's good. I thought for some reason all dwarves had kind of a strong connection to the mountain and the earth, like Disa would, but...
There is a dwarvish connection to the mountain, but I think Disa also has a special connection among dwarves.
I mean, it is her profession, as we find out later. So yeah, that does work. I like that actually quite a bit.
I also noticed that Disa is back to being a nice lady. Her evil, ambitious speech at the end of the last season seems to be forgotten again.
Yeah. Sometimes some people are like that, though. They just like dip their toes into being pure evil.
Just tried it on for the day.
Yeah. So it cuts forward a bit. It shows her meeting with Durin, King Durin. It shows her stone singing ability, and I like that it looked almost like a form of echolocation, like magical echolocation, I guess.
Dare I call this an example of scientification?
Yeah, but I thought it was good. Sometimes I don't like that, and we'll talk about more later. But
it's a decent scientification. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but,
I know. It always bugs me one way or the other when sometimes it bugs me when people try to and again, we'll get into this in more detail with our lore, language, and letters. Stay till the end. But sometimes it does bug me when they scientificify magic systems, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends how much it feels natural and organic. This one felt very good, though. I like this one. Yes,
this one does have a better flavor to it than some others.
Yes, yeah. I felt like it didn't. So I think my thing is it doesn't dampen the magic at all. Like sometimes when they try to give a work of fiction some science, like she's still being magical by singing out like into the cave and mapping it out. It's almost like a close analogy I could think of is like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, showing how Toph can see through earthbending is what it reminded me of, you know? Mm-hmm. It's still earthbending, which is a magical force, but it felt like a very logical way to use that, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I just like the mountain singing all the time. It's so poignant. Mm-hmm. The way the mountain didn't respond was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
In a tragic way, but beautiful.
Yeah. I think there's another plot line about former prince and King Durin. They both say, "Why should I apologize when so should he? When he should be the one apologizing." It's really funny. They have a similar personality. They have the same names. It's just kind of makes me laugh.
It was very realistic to me.
Yeah, definitely. These are being stuck in the middle of it is very rough. I've been there, and it's not fun.
No, it is not. I thought there was just a lot of great scenes and great dialogue in Khazad-dûm this time. The confrontation between King Durin and Disa was great. It had great dialogue, great music. I really liked acknowledging the strength necessary to carry a grudge. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a choice that he's making. It's easier sometimes to apologize, and then people choose to carry grudges. It's a bad use of that strength.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, it's followed up with another great scene from Disa and Prince Durin. I really liked the discussion of whether the problem was the lack of food or the lack of connection with the mountain. And just lines were delivered so well, like confessing, "I'm afraid." It was just so many great, powerful scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, Khazad-dûm had some really good ones. It's come very far from it did a season ago where I didn't understand anything or anyone at all.
And I feel like a lot of this stuff is better than mediocre.
Yeah. I'd say these 2 episodes I definitely enjoyed very strongly.
Yeah, like, my only thing is I didn't really like the Halbrand explanation in the beginning, but I like a bunch of the rest of it. Mm-hmm. The worst dialogue in season 2 is the dialogue they repeat from season 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
But finally, we have our Celebrimbor story.
Yeah.
So we get Sauron deceiving again.
Yeah, he's called the Deceiver, right?
Yep, Sauron the Deceiver. And there he goes deceiving again. I really like how he appeals to Celebrimbor's ego with flattery and how he convinces him to talk. Like, Celebrimbor wasn't going to talk to him at all, but Halbrand Sauron just, gets in there, finds that little chink and that little weakness and exploits it and gets what he wants.
Yeah. See, this is the scene that makes me think that he could tell Galadriel was looking for somebody to champion back. Like, this is this is who he is. I don't know. Maybe it goes into more detail and explains it better later, but I feel like once Galadriel came along, he couldn't help but position her to want to send him home. In the same way that it was a lot more active with Celebrimbor, but Galadriel's a lot more of an outward personality who needs something to do, and Sauron's a master manipulator. He probably could tell that right away. My take still is that Sauron just was manufacturing Galadriel to kind of scapegoat her, to attack her, to make her feel bad about her decisions and stuff like that. I feel like he really kind of used her like he used Celebrimbor. Watching this scene made me think that.
And I can't prove that's not the case. I think it comes down to how much credit we give Sauron for thinking ahead.
Yeah.
I think Sauron is really good at improvising.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think season 1 was mostly him just doing stuff and then getting to a position where now in season 2, he finally is starting to distill a plan.
I think he's good at both. And I don't know which one he was doing in season 1. I guess that is in the air and up to interpretation. I think, like a major theme of our review so far, it depends how things later out in the show play out.
Definitely.
If we can see if it was a plan or if it was just him going along with what was happening.
Yeah, there could definitely be some information get in season 3 through 5 that will make me totally renege on my interpretation of Sauron as improv master. Mm-hmm. But right now, I think Sauron's more of an improviser than a planner in season 1.
I think he's good at both. That's why Elrond's so concerned about what his plan is with the rings.
By the time he's getting to the rings, I think he's starting to get a plan. But I think a lot of his time in Numenor and with the King of the Southland stuff, I think that was just more him doing stuff. And of course, he's going to use it to his advantage later and rewrite history to suit his needs later on. Mm-hmm. I'm just not convinced he had everything planned out in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have to think a lot long and hard about, because I do also agree that Sauron was genuinely going to try to reform or become repentant at some point. But I think by the time he met Galadriel, that was already gone. I don't know. I mean, the way that he snatched and I should have mentioned this back when this happened, way back in the flashback, but he takes the manner in which he takes the sigil from that old man who's kind of teaching him to become human in a way, or good, was very cruel. And I understand that could have just been a cruel streak coming through and he was trying to repent, but I feel like to me, it just throws a lot of doubt on when and how much he was dedicated to changing his ways.
I agree. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, back with Sauron talking to Celebrimbor. I would fall for Sauron's corruption easily. Like you
most of us would.
Like that would get me in an instant. Just how good he is at like you said, like catching on to things. Like
I really liked how Sauron proffered truth-telling to illustrate to Celebrimbor that he could see through him. He was like, oh, I'm going to tell you the truth because you see through me, is a very flattering way to present things. And he uses this to fuel his identity change in such a brilliant way. He's like, yeah, I'm not Halbrand. People know I'm not Halbrand. I have to acknowledge this somehow. And he gets under Celebrimbor's metaphorical armor by appealing to Celebrimbor's skill of seeing through him. Mm-hmm. It's so tricky.
Well, yeah, and then we'll get into who Sauron pretends to be, right?
Yeah, Sauron...
I mean, who Sauron pretends to be, yeah.
Sauron says that he is Anatar. He tells Celebrimbor that he's an emissary of higher powers, and he constructs another lie, basically, but he presents it by addressing the truth that he is not actually Halbrand. Mm-hmm. But I think to a certain extent, Sauron really believes what he's telling Celebrimbor.
Yeah.
He really believes that darkness is growing stronger and that the Rings of Power are the only way to stop it. I don't think he's lying when he says that. This is the truth as he understands it.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely is not selling something he doesn't believe.
No, he believes this to some extent. I mean, he probably knows that he's not actually an emissary from higher powers and stuff like that, but we're just going to ignore those means because we believe these ends.
Right. Also, that's a good point. Something that Celebrimbor should have picked up on is, I don't think he would have believed Galadriel to tell him not to treat with any sort of mire or higher power,
But maybe Galadriel just doesn't have all the facts.
Yeah, I mean, and I think also he was trying to sow some doubt in, like she was using him and trying to keep him from what's the name that he's assuming here again? Sauron is
Anatar.
Sauron says Galadriel is trying to take stuff from you. Maybe the access to Anatar would be one of them too. Yeah,
driving a wedge between Celebrimbor and Galadriel can't be a bad thing for Sauron.
Yeah. Yeah, it strengthens the story a bit, but there's a couple of things that I feel like if Celebrimbor were very closely paying attention, he could have caught on to. But that same thing has been happening with Galadriel the whole season 1. There's a bunch of inconsistencies and stuff she could have caught on to, or not as much lies, but even straight up like, I took this from a dead man,
Yeah, if she'd actually put any critical thought into it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even, if not critical thought, like an ounce of skepticism in her own beliefs and convictions.
Yeah. I want to spend a moment to discuss Sauron's mistranslation of his name.
Mm-hmm.
Sauron says that the name Anatar means sharer of gifts.
Mm-hmm.
But the proper translation of it means Lord of Gifts. And Celebrimbor actually provides us with that translation as well in the show.
Yeah.
I think this serves to highlight a small slip in his deception, in Sauron's deception. But at this point, Celebrimbor is too far under his influence to take that slip seriously, like we were talking about things that Celebrimbor could pick up on.
Yeah.
Sauron uses translation in this instance to serve his egalitarian talk, sharer of gifts instead of Lord of Gifts,
mm-hmm.
while his real name shows the lie that he is being a Lord of Gifts. He wants to be a Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But the lie he's selling to Celebrimbor is that he's going to share the gifts. Presumably,
right.
You share among equals. But he's actually setting himself up as a lord.
Yeah, and it shows how he's playing kind of with Celebrimbor. He like a lot of what he did was saying that they are just lording over you, basically. So it makes sense, like that they are kind of. He doesn't want to set him up as like, oh, it's me who's going to take stuff from you, or them who's going to take stuff from you, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even though he is, and they really probably wouldn't. I think honestly, also that Celebrimbor not treating it with him is an interesting parallel with Elrond wanting to not have anything to do with rings.
Oh, that's a great catch.
Yeah, I definitely think that Celebrimbor was smart at originally to just not treat with him at all, like he originally intended.
Yeah, he could have just left him standing out in the rain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could have asked somebody like the second higher up to tell him to go too.
Mm-hmm. Well, now you're treating with him.
Maybe.
Well, I think that does that for our rings.
Right.
Now let's do our things. First up, we have Wizard's Wisdom.
So my quote came from the prologue, so to speak, the flashback. And it was that old man that Sauron robbed. He says you have to choose it. He says you have to choose it again, and the next day, and the next, until it becomes part of your nature. He's talking about Sauron had asked about the nature of being good. I just thought that was really good.
This is a good quote. I like it too.
Reminds me of like the small things adding up, which is just a theme that we've talked about throughout the films.
Yep. I had a few quotes. I actually have a couple from Gil-galad. First, I will believe you when I no longer see the lie behind your eyes.
Mm.
He says this to Galadriel.
Yeah.
And I just thought it seemed like a pretty potent quote. The lie behind your eyes seemed evocative to me. Yeah.
Gil-galad's always had a pretty flowery way to speak, but I don't know. His character kind of had like a big glow up in this episode, and I feel like I'm liking him slightly more.
Yeah, I agree. My other Gil-galad quote is, "It does not take the eye of an eagle to see your thoughts have flown far afield."
Yeah, that one I like too. And again, it's like another one that just shows he's different now. I don't know if it's putting on the ring or just season 2 just decided to go in a different direction with him or what.
little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah, he seems a lot kinder, a lot more empathetic, and not fake wise. Before he gave off a very big, like, he thinks he knows what he's doing, but has no idea what's going on kind of air to him.
Yeah. The thing I like about this quote is the alliteration, the eye of an eagle, and flown far afield.
Yeah.
Stood out to me. So, you know me, I'm always going to like my good alliterative quotes.
Yeah.
And finally, I think it was Disa who said this when she said, you two wouldn't be trafficking in conjecture, would you?
Yeah, that was early on, before the earthquake even, I think. It was really, I liked that characterization of Disa a lot.
The phrase trafficking in conjecture is another one of those evocative phrases that I really like.
Yeah, it's might be a fun way to say gossip. I might try to bring that into the real world some way or another.
Let's do it. Next, we have a language, lore, and letters. We are going to continue our treatment of letter 210 on the Zimmerman script. And since this segment seems to be everyone's favorite, let's go ahead and have a language, lore of letters every episode.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
First thing in today's segment of it is Tolkien rips into Zimmerman for his treatment of Lorien. Tolkien is especially offended at the depiction of tiny fairies. And it's because of Tolkien that we have a conception of the tall, beautiful elves at all. I think Tolkien would be proud to know that he had that impact on the popular conception of elves and fairies.
Yeah, I am curious if we could, ask him how he would feel about elves and fairies almost being two separate entities now in popular conception because of how he distinguished elves.
It'd probably be different than what he would have wanted, but I think it would overall be a victory.
Yeah.
Or at least I consider it a victory.
Real big fantasy nerds know that elves and fairies have a connection too in most works, and that's due to Lord of the Rings and Tolkien being he's really the root of all modern fantasy, more or less, and he knew that from the actual folklore that he was inspired by, that elves and fairies had this. I mean, they were interchangeable.
Yep.
At one point.
Definitely. Tolkien comments in his letter that, quote, practically everything having moral import has vanished from the synopsis. If this observation is as true as it sounds, this would make a terrible adaptation indeed. Especially
this scene he was talking about where Galadriel was tempted by the ring. I really liked that scene. I mentioned it. Like, it was one of the first scenes where I, really understood the power of the ring.
Yeah, it's a bad scene to cut.
Yeah, and I mean the New Line Cinema Films did a great job with it too.
Yeah, I liked it. I also like Tolkien's explanation that no, quote, laboratory would discover chemical properties of lembas that made it superior to other cakes of wheatmeal. The magic of the elves transcends our scientific understanding of the world. Mm-hmm. It's something that we can't just recreate through enough technology. And I really liked his word that we mentioned earlier, scientification.
Yes.
Is such a good coinage.
Yes, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. If some Lord of the Rings adaptation tried to explain lembas bread through some sort of physical means or nutritional, scientific, biological means, would just not be, it would be so bad, no matter how you did it.
Yeah. It's just magic.
Yeah, just leave it at, it can magically make you full.
Tolkien then comments on the dual purpose of lembas in the books. First, as a means of surmounting credibility difficulties of the journeys in the books. And more importantly, Tolkien hesitatingly says that lembas has a religious significance. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really expound on this more in the letter.
No.
People often draw a parallel between lembas and the Eucharist. As Frodo and Sam subsist on only lembas during their journey in Mordor, it becomes apparent that the way bread has extra virtue when used to the exclusion of other food, which is a motive that has a parallel with the Eucharist. There's certain medieval traditions that saints have subsisted on just the Eucharist, and daily communion is encouraged and things like that.
For me, Lembas reminds me of manna in the Old Testament, where Moses and his people had to subsist on this weird magical food that made them feel full while going in the desert for 40 years. Just the property that it makes you feel full after just like a few eating a bit of it. There's also other mystical foods that make you feel full in like Chinese folklore, in mythology too. There's a lot of people subsisting off of like dew from a tree, stuff like that. But that's more about the, like, again, like this idea of this being spiritually enlightened somehow means it sustains your body.
I really like the parallel with manna. I've never liked the parallel with the Eucharist because Sam becomes dissatisfied with just Limbus, and I feel like that undermines the Eucharist parallel. Sam is, our entry point character, supposed to be a good guy, and his explicit dissatisfaction with Limbus doesn't feel very Eucharistic to me, but it feels more consistent with the manna parallel.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many questions raised. Like, the Eucharist is supposed to be like sustaining and stuff, but like there's a connection between that and the spiritual significance of what the Eucharist is. But how would that, like in Middle Earth, there's no, and I tried reading more about the Eucharist and the substantiation of it, and also transubstantiation, yeah, and it's over my head. That's even beyond like my understanding of religion. I don't understand how people have fought wars for that in the past, but it's very important still to people today. So I won't try too hard to go on how, like, I don't get either way how like it is that significant, but it is very significant to a lot of people. And I don't see how like Tolkien could take such an important topic and not have a good parallel to like what the Lembas bread is supposed to transubstantiate into.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I think that, there's no allegory for transubstantiation here. The religious significance, I think, fits a lot better with manna. And I really like this. Yeah,
that's definitely, and I was just looking into manna the other day, so it's really funny that it comes up, because there's just, this is a bit of a, I'm not going to go too far, but it's just very weird, like the characteristics they specifically list in the Bible. It makes it feel like it's like a real thing that somehow they found. Like, it makes me want to scientificate it and try to figure out what the heck that was, But maybe it was Lembas bread.
Tolkien shares that he resents changes to the characters more than to the plot or scenery. It's always the characters that drew me into the world, so this observation makes sense to me.
Yeah, that, I feel like you're able to see the deformities of changing something up on a person, kind of like the Uncanny Valley, Like, if somebody makes a weird painting of a mountain versus a weird painting of a face, this is like the literature version of that.
Yeah. Tolkien would have hated New Line Cinema Aragorn.
Yeah. From what I get, like, if the Bakshi cartoon was closer to his depiction, it's a very different character. I will say that.
Yeah. And I would say Bakshi is closer to Book Aragorn.
Yeah.
Not his costume, but but personality-wise.
Yeah.
And finally for today, Tolkien observes that the narrative has two branches after this, the ring-bearers and the rest of the company. He says, quote, "It is essential that these two branches should each be treated in coherent sequence, because they are totally different in tone and scenery. Jumbling them together entirely destroys these things." So I also bet that Tolkien would not have been a fan of how the New Line Cinema movies wove the branches together.
Yeah, this was a talking point for us a lot. And I was asking, I'd ask, when it was cutting back and forth between the scenes and there was parallels, if those parallels were present in the book, which you mentioned this. So I knew this. I didn't know that it really bugged him when somebody apparently, and this obviously elucidates that he does not like it. I want to see an edit of the New Line Cinema movies like this, where it just shows each of the story one after the other.
That would be really cool.
I want to see how much I'd like it or not. I mean, those scenes weren't specifically made to do that, so it might not work out. And I also wonder, I mean, also the animated films we watched, they all did the same thing too, It's just how film works. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like maybe that's also like, Tolkien is kind of from a different era of storytelling than most movies we watch nowadays. I mean, he lived 100 years ago,
Yeah.
And I feel like that sort of story where they tell one and then the other isn't really done that often anymore. And if it is done, it's usually done like on an episodic show where it shows like two characters' perspectives like in a different episode completely or something like that.
That makes sense. Well, hopefully we will wrap this letter up next time.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it a lot so far.
In the meantime, we have a question that needs answering.
The question is, if orcs craft items as well as the elves, I think I mean like the elves, then why is their cuisine just rotten meat and spoiled draught most of the time? Is that like feeding orcs Cheeto Puffs and Mountain Dew? From Arsika or Orcish admirer.
So there's a comment in The Hobbit that orcs craft items as well as the dwarves.
Mm-hmm.
As well as the dwarves craft items.
Okay.
But I'm sure that the dwarves eat better than rotten meat and spoiled draft.
Mm-hmm.
Orcs eat badly because they have to. Our canonical references to what orcs consume are in the context of them being Sauron's slaves. If orcs could get better food than that, they would certainly take it. But artificial foods like Cheeto Puffs and Mountain Dew, devoid of all nutritional value, seem like some good examples of primary world orc food to me.
Yeah, the orcs that we see are out in the field and just eating, like they're so hungry that they, they're probably like humans would eat rotten meat in the same position, It's not their first choice.
Yeah, if you're a slave and you're hungry enough, you'll eat what you have.
Yeah. I think, so the orcs and their whole society, at least in the New Line Cinema books, have focused heavily on industrialization without like any heart or soul. Actually in Lord of the Rings, those themes go hand in hand. You can't have heavy industrialization without it. So in the realm of food, this does lead me to think junk food, like Cheetos and Mountain.
Yeah.
I think if we wanted to lean into the tech of the world, maybe, and you didn't want to go on like full bag of Cheetos at the orc supermarket, the first foods we industrialized would be meat production, canned foods, and bread. And I feel like that's probably what Homeland orcs eat. Like, reminds me a lot of British cuisine. Actually, I was thinking about while they were out and about and eating all that rotten food, that's why people made hardtack, which is arguably like the first mass-produced food. Back, like Roman soldiers all the way through Confederate soldiers ate that out in the field because it was easy to store and it didn't break because it was so hard.
Yeah, it didn't spoil. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
And a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.